What happens when a school bully lays hands on the quietest girl in the hallway? In just 10 seconds, everything he thought he knew would shatter. Emma Rodriguez walked unnoticed for years, blending into the walls, until Jake Morrison's arrogance met her silent strength. What happened next would make the whole school remember her, and make him regret underestimating her forever. Emma Rodriguez was 17, but she moved through the world with the softness of someone who'd learned to live quietly long before her age required it. Every morning, she walked into Lincoln High with her cardigan sleeves pulled over her palms, her steps light enough to go unnoticed. She preferred it that way, drifting through crowded hallways like a calm breeze no one bothered to feel. Her days were simple, almost ritualistic. She'd arrive early, choosing the same empty bench by the courtyard window where sunlight pooled gently across her notebook. She liked the warmth on her hands, the peaceful rustle of leaves outside, the distant hum of students slowly filling the building. Emma wasn't invisible because she lacked presence. She was invisible because she had mastered the art of staying small. A quiet survival, stitched together with patience and silence. Every day carried a quiet struggle that Emma never spoke about. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. It was the kind of pain that hides in tiny moments, unnoticed by the world. Her hands always trembled just a little when she opened her locker, afraid the door might jam again or that someone would be watching, waiting to make a comment. Even choosing a seat in class felt like walking a tightrope. If she sat too close to others, she feared being judged. Too far, and she'd look strange or unfriendly. Lunchtime was the hardest. She'd sit alone with her simple sandwich, pretending to scroll on her phone so she wouldn't seem out of place. The noise around her buzzed like a world she wasn't invited into. To everyone else, these were ordinary school moments. To Emma, they were quiet battles she fought every single day. Evelyn's world had always been small, carefully contained, predictable, safe. But returning to the university introduced new faces, unexpected kindnesses, and gentle disruptions she didn't know she needed. The first was her neighbor, Mrs. Whitfield, a retired librarian who lived across the hall. Every morning, she peeked out through her slightly open door as Evelyn left for class. "Off to your big university again?" she'd say with a proud smile. Evelyn would nod, adjusting her bag. "Trying my best." Mrs. Whitfield always responded the same way, tapping her cane lightly on the floor. "Books never forget their readers, dear. Neither do dreams. Keep going." It was such a simple sentence, but it warmed the quiet corners of Evelyn's heart. Then there was her younger cousin, Mia, a vibrant 20-year-old studying graphic design. She called Evelyn almost every evening, excitedly asking about her classes. "How was calculus today?" Evelyn often laughed softly. "Challenging." "Good," Mia would reply. "Challenging means you're growing, and you've done hard things your whole life. This one's yours." Their conversations reminded Evelyn that even though the world had changed around her, she wasn't navigating it alone. But the most unexpected presence came from a stranger, Dr. Harriet Powell, whom Evelyn met in the mathematics library. Her voice was warm, her eyes curious, and unlike others, she didn't look at Evelyn with doubt or surprise. "You have the mind of a mathematician," Harriet said gently one afternoon, noting the advanced text Evelyn was reading. "No," Evelyn whispered, lowering her gaze. "I just love the subject." Harriet smiled knowingly. People who truly love it often understand it better than those who merely study it. Each of these individuals, neighbor, family, stranger, added small but powerful shifts to Evelyn's life. A bit of warmth here, a nudge of encouragement there, a spark of belief she didn't yet have in herself. Slowly, without her realizing it, the world around her was opening, inviting her to take up space again. There was a reason Emma preferred silence, a memory she carried like a bruise beneath her ribs, one that Phoenix had etched into her long before Lincoln High ever knew her name. Back at her old school, things had started the same way. Quiet girl, crowded hallways, whispered comments she pretended not to hear. But it hadn't stayed harmless. One afternoon, a rumor spread about her family. A lie so cruel it grew legs and chased her through every classroom. Friends she once trusted drifted away, choosing comfort over loyalty. The worst moment came during a group project when a boy she'd never spoken to shoved her desk, sending her papers fluttering like wounded birds. The class laughed. Emma didn't. Something in her cracked that day. Not loudly, not visibly, but in a way that made her mother hold her a little longer that night without asking questions. Leaving Phoenix wasn't an impulsive move. It was an escape, a quiet decision to rebuild herself somewhere new. But scars don't vanish with distance. They travel with you, tucked behind careful smiles and lowered eyes. Emma learned early that isolation was safer than disappointment, and silence hurt less than trusting the wrong people again. There was a time when Emma wasn't this quiet. A time when her laughter filled rooms, when she stayed after school for art club, when she believed friendships were safe places to land. She remembered sunny afternoons in Phoenix, sketchbook on her lap, surrounded by people who once felt like home. But those days felt like another lifetime now. At Lincoln High, happiness had become something she observed from a distance. In other people's smiles, in crowded lunch tables she would never join. The girl who once spoke freely now measured every word, every step, every breath. The contrast was sharp, almost painful. She hadn't changed by choice. She changed because the world had taught her to. The day everything began to shift started like any other. Quiet, predictable, safe in its routine. Emma was walking toward her usual spot in the courtyard when something unusual caught her eye. Her notebook, the one she guarded more carefully than her textbooks, lying abandoned by the drinking fountain. She froze. She knew she hadn't dropped it. When she picked it up, her stomach tightened. The cover was bent, pages slightly crumpled, as though someone had flipped through it. Inside were her private notes, dates, times, small observations she recorded whenever Jake or his friends bothered her. Not emotional entries, just facts, evidence. But tucked between 2 pages was something new. A small sticky note. 4 words written in messy handwriting. "You think you're smart?" Emma's pulse quickened. Someone knew she'd been documenting everything. Someone wanted her to feel exposed. For the first time in months, a different emotion stirred in her chest. Not fear, but a flicker of determination. A realization that staying silent wasn't keeping her safe anymore. This wasn't just bullying anymore. It was a warning. And it was the moment Emma understood that the quiet life she'd carefully built was about to shake. Emma's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the notebook until the edges dug into her palms. For a moment the world felt too loud, too close. She looked around, quick, sharp glances, searching for a face watching her, waiting for her reaction. Nothing. No one. Her heartbeat thudded painfully in her ears. The note felt heavier than paper should. Someone had been close enough to touch her things, close enough to know her secret. Fear rose first, then anger, then something colder, resolve. She slipped the notebook into her bag with steady hands, even though nothing inside her felt steady. This wasn't an accident, and Emma knew it. As Emma walked to her next class, the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, each step heavier than the last. A quiet war raged inside her. One she'd fought before, one she hoped she'd never have to face again. Part of her wanted to disappear, to shrink back into the familiar safety of silence. That was what had protected her in Phoenix, what had kept her from breaking completely. But another part, a small, trembling part, whispered that running had done nothing but move the pain from one school to another. How long would she keep starting over? How long could she pretend that silence was strength when it was starting to feel like surrender? She hated that Jake had gotten under her skin. She hated that one sticky note could unravel months of careful calm. But most of all, she hated the doubt creeping in, the fear that maybe she wasn't as strong as she tried to believe. Her mother always said courage wasn't loud. But right now, Emma wasn't sure she had any left. Sitting in her next class, Emma stared at the corner of her notebook without really seeing it. Her thoughts were tangled, but somewhere beneath the fear and frustration, a quiet truth began to stir. She had spent years avoiding conflict, hoping silence would shield her. But the note in her notebook proved something she had never wanted to admit. Staying quiet didn't stop people like Jake. It only made her an easier target. For the first time, Emma felt a shift inside her, small but undeniable. A thought she'd never allowed herself to consider fully. Maybe she didn't have to stay invisible to be safe. Maybe her voice, however soft, mattered more than she believed. It wasn't courage yet, but it was the beginning of something that felt like it. As Emma packed her books after class, still shaken but quiet, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, you dropped this." She looked up to see Maya Patel, a classmate she'd spoken to only twice, holding out a pen Emma hadn't even realized she'd lost. No jokes, no pity, no curious questions. Just a simple, genuine gesture. Maya didn't linger. She just offered a small smile, the kind that didn't demand anything in return, and walked away. It was such a small moment, easy to overlook. But to Emma, it felt like someone had opened a window in a suffocating room. For the first time that day, she didn't feel completely alone. Later that afternoon, Emma found herself in the library, her quiet refuge, trying to steady her thoughts. As she settled into her usual corner, she heard soft footsteps and looked up to see Maya again, hesitating with a stack of books in her arms. "Mind if I sit?" Maya asked, her voice gentle, almost careful. Emma nodded, surprised by how natural it felt. They didn't talk at first, just sat across from each other while pages turned softly between them. But after a few minutes, Maya leaned forward and whispered, "You always look like you're carrying the whole world alone. You don't have to." The words were simple, but they struck something deep and tender inside Emma, a memory of what friendship used to feel like. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, warm, familiar, a connection Emma never expected, but realized she desperately needed. Maya's gentle words echoed in Emma's mind long after they left the library. You don't have to carry it alone. Something about the kindness, the softness, unlocked a memory she'd kept buried under layers of silence. She was back in Phoenix, sitting in the courtyard of her old school. The sky had been warm that day, golden light touching everything like a blessing. Emma was sketching quietly when her best friend at the time, Lila, plopped down beside her with 2 juice boxes. "You draw when you're sad?" Lila had said, nudging her shoulder. "So I'm staying until you're not." It was such a small promise, yet Emma remembered how safe it made her feel. But that friendship, once her anchor, had dissolved the moment rumors spread. Lila hadn't chosen to stay. She'd chosen the crowd, the comfort, the easy path. And Emma had learned then that even the people who made you feel seen could disappear. Back in the present, the memory tightened her chest. Not with anger, but with longing. Maya's simple kindness had reminded her of what she'd lost, and what she wasn't sure she deserved anymore. Just as Emma began to feel a fragile sense of comfort return, a soft thread of connection she hadn't felt in years, the universe reminded her how easily peace could shatter. The next morning, whispers followed her the moment she walked through the school doors. Not loud, but sharp enough to sting. Students glanced at her, then at their phones, then back at her again. Her stomach tightened. Something had happened. By the time she reached her locker, she knew. Jake stood there, leaning casually against the metal door with a smirk that made her heart sink. His phone screen was still lit, and on it a blurry photo of her notebook. Her notes, her evidence. "So," he drawled, "keeping secrets about me, huh?" The air around her felt heavier. Whatever safety she had begun to rebuild was suddenly on the edge of collapsing again. Emma's pulse hammered as she stood in front of her locker, Jake's shadow stretching across the metal like something alive. Her throat tightened, dry and aching, while the hallway noise faded into a dull, distant hum, as if the world had stepped back, leaving her alone with fear. The cold air from a nearby vent brushed against her skin, raising goosebumps along her arms. She kept her hands at her sides, but they trembled anyway. Jake's smirk deepened, and the sight of her crushed notebook on his phone screen sent a sharp ache through her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to shrink, to disappear, to do what she had always done, survive quietly. But another voice rose inside her, shaky and unfamiliar. "How long will you keep running?" Her breath hitched. She could feel the softness of Maya's kindness lingering in her mind, warring against the cold dread twisting in her stomach. The hallway lights seemed too bright, too harsh, exposing every inch of her vulnerability. It was all too much. The past, the fear, the memories of Phoenix, the threat standing inches from her now. Emma felt herself breaking, but she also felt something else stirring beneath the cracks. In that fragile silence, something shifted inside them, quietly, like a curtain being lifted after years of darkness. As the weight of their struggle pressed hardest on their chest, a small, unexpected moment cracked through. A soft smile from someone they never noticed before, a gentle hand resting on their shoulder, or a memory from long ago reminding them they had once survived even heavier storms. It wasn't a grand miracle, just a tiny spark, yet enough to warm the coldness they had carried for so long. Their breath steadied, their vision cleared, and for the first time in days, maybe years, they felt a flicker of understanding. Maybe they weren't as alone as they believed. Maybe life was offering them one more chance to hold on. That small realization quietly lit the path toward what comes next. After the heaviness of the past moments, a small, unexpected peace settled around them. Simple, gentle, and quietly healing. Maybe it was the warmth of morning sunlight brushing their hands, or the soft laughter of a child passing by, or even the familiar smell of tea brewing in the kitchen. For the first time in a long while, they paused, and actually felt grateful. Grateful for breath, for memory, for the tiny details they once overlooked. The contrast from the earlier tension made this moment feel even more precious, fragile, like a flower that bloomed after a long winter. A reminder that even after deep pain, life still offers small gifts, waiting to be noticed. As the quiet moment faded, the weight of everything left unsaid slowly settled back onto their chest, gentle but undeniable. There were words they had carried for years, tucked into the corners of their heart like fragile paper notes. Apologies that never found a voice, gratitude that remained trapped behind pride, love that was felt deeply yet spoken too rarely. They replayed old conversations in their mind, the ones that ended too quickly, the ones where truth trembled on the edge of their lips but never crossed. Why is it, they wondered, that the most important words are always the hardest to say? In that silence, their regret deepened, but so did their understanding. The heart remembers everything, even what the tongue never dared to speak. Just when a small spark of hope had begun to warm their day, something shifted, quietly, but enough to sting. A phone call that went unanswered, a promise someone forgot, a plan that suddenly changed without explanation. It wasn't big, not the kind of thing that breaks a person, but it was enough to make the little light inside flicker. For a moment, the old familiar doubt returned, settling into their chest like a cold draft sneaking through an open window. Maybe nothing really changes, they thought. Maybe I expected too much. They tried to brush it off, but the disappointment lingered, soft, subtle, yet painfully real. This small setback reminded them of all the times life had offered a glimmer of warmth only to pull away too soon. And once again, they felt themselves standing on fragile ground. The hallways felt heavier than ever that day. Each step Emma took echoed like a drum in her chest, reminding her that she could no longer hide behind quietness alone. The tension in the air was palpable, whispers brushing past her, eyes glancing, lingering, waiting for a crack in her armor. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed sharper, highlighting every corner, every shadow, every vulnerability. Her heartbeat quickened, not from fear alone, but from the weight of everything she had endured. Every knock of a book, every sneer, every note in her locker. And yet, buried beneath the tension was something else. A flicker of readiness, a subtle pulse of courage she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. She tightened her grip on her bag, grounding herself in the moment. This was it, the turning point where the quiet life she had meticulously built might collide with the storm she could no longer ignore. The world was holding its breath, and so was she. Jake stood just a few feet away, his usual smirk faltering for the first time. Emma's eyes met his, steady and unflinching, and for a moment, the noisy hallway seemed to fade into silence. Every whispered joke, every shove, every cruel note, It all hung between them like a heavy curtain ready to fall. I didn't realize, Jake finally stammered, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I was wrong. Emma's heart skipped, a mixture of relief and lingering hurt pressing against her ribs. The power in her silence had not been in avoiding conflict, but in standing strong when it mattered most. She stepped closer, not to strike or scold, but to meet him as an equal, quiet, yet unshakable. "It's not about being right or wrong," she said softly. "It's about seeing someone for who they really are, before it's too late." For the first time, Jake looked at her without judgment, without arrogance. There was a pause, a recognition, a fragile understanding that the quiet girl who had been underestimated was far stronger than anyone imagined. And in that fleeting, heartbeat moment, the hallway felt lighter, warmer, as if the air itself had forgiven. Emma's courage had changed everything. Not with noise, but with truth. The hallway slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted. Students who had lingered, curious and watchful, now whispered in subdued tones, their eyes wide with newfound respect. Some glanced at Emma and then quickly away, unsure how to approach the girl who had just quietly rewritten the rules of their small world. Emma exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. She didn't smile, not yet. She only allowed herself a subtle relaxation, a soft acknowledgement that the storm had passed, at least for now. Jake lingered for a moment longer, his usual confidence replaced by a hesitant curiosity. He looked at her, really looked, as though seeing her for the first time. The arrogance had melted away, replaced with something softer. Remorse, awe, maybe even a hint of admiration. Maya, standing a few feet away, caught Emma's eye and offered a small, encouraging smile. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried warmth, validation, and a quiet sense of belonging. In the midst of chaos, in the echoes of a school hallway, Emma discovered something new. That silence could hold power, and that strength didn't always need to shout. Later that evening, Emma sat by her window, the golden light of sunset spilling across her desk. The hallway, the whispers, the confrontation. It all replayed in her mind like a quiet film. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Fear, tension, but also a quiet pride. She realized that courage wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, measured, and often invisible to the world. Standing up didn't require shouting. It required patience, observation, and knowing one's worth. Emma understood now that the battles she had endured had not diminished her. They had shaped her, teaching a lesson she would carry for life. That silence can be powerful, dignity can be unshakable, and even the quietest voice can leave a lasting impact. Sometimes the strongest stories are whispered, not shouted. The next morning, Emma returned to her usual routine, but the world felt subtly different. The lockers still clanged, students still hurried past, and the chatter of the hallway carried on. Yet, the tension that had hovered for so long had softened. Maya waved from across the courtyard, and Emma returned a small, unspoken smile. It was ordinary, quiet, and yet it carried a weight of reassurance neither needed to explain. Her backpack rested comfortably on her shoulders, her steps felt lighter, and even her notebook, once a symbol of fear, now felt like a small emblem of strength. Not every problem was solved. Not every fear vanished. But Emma realized that some victories were quiet ones. Moments where peace returned softly, without fanfare, and the heart learned to breathe again. In that gentle morning, life felt manageable. And that was enough. Emma's gaze fell on the small photograph tucked inside her notebook. A candid shot of her and Lila from Phoenix, laughing in the sunlight, carefree and unburdened. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded, but the image held a quiet power. She ran her fingers over it gently, letting the memory wash over her. It wasn't just a picture. It was proof. Proof that joy had existed, that connection had mattered, and that she could find it again. For the video, the camera lingers on the photo, sunlight reflecting softly on its surface, while Emma's hands hold it delicately. A single, meaningful gesture. Small, silent, yet overflowing with unspoken emotion. The moment says everything faceless storytelling needs. History, hope, and a quiet promise for the future. Life has a way of teaching its lessons quietly, often in moments we barely notice at the time. Emma's journey reminds us that strength isn't always loud, and courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it is the steady heartbeat that refuses to give in, the quiet hand that steadies itself in the storm, the small act of dignity that speaks louder than words ever could. We often measure power by who shouts the loudest or who stands tallest, but the truth is different. True strength can be the girl who walks through the hallways unnoticed yet refuses to let cruelty define her. It can be the student who documents injustice in silence, who meets hardship with patience, and who discovers that courage often lives in the small, daily choices we make. And love, real connection, isn't always a grand gesture either. Sometimes it is a gentle smile from a friend, a sticky note that reminds you someone sees you, or the simple act of showing up when no one is watching. Emma's story teaches us that our voices matter, even when they're quiet, and that resilience is built in the pauses between pain and hope. The world will test us, sometimes harshly, but our response, however soft or subtle, can leave a mark far more lasting than fear ever could. In the end, it is not the noise we make, but the strength we carry in silence, that defines who we are. Emma sat by her window as the last rays of sunlight spilled across her desk. The hallway, the whispers, the confrontations, all felt like distant echoes now. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension in her shoulders dissolve, and for the first time in months, allowed herself to simply breathe. Her notebook lay open beside her, the photo of her and Lila catching the golden light. It was a quiet reminder of everything she had endured, everything she had survived, and everything she could still hope for. In that fragile, fleeting moment, peace settled over her like a gentle hand on the shoulder, soft, unshakable, and deeply comforting. Emma smiled softly, tears glinting, not from sorrow, but from the quiet relief of being seen, of being strong, and of finally being herself. Sometimes the softest footsteps leave the deepest echoes, and the quietest hearts carry the strongest courage. In the silence of a single moment, a life can change, a story can be told, and a voice once unseen can finally be remembered. If this story touched your heart, take a quiet moment to reflect on the strength in your own life. Perhaps someone you know carries their courage silently, waiting to be seen. Share your thoughts, memories, or gentle reflections in the comments below. Sometimes, even a few words can remind us all that quiet strength matters, and that every story, no matter how soft, deserves to be heard. The camera lingers on an empty school courtyard bathed in golden sunset light. A single chair sits quietly beneath a tree, a soft breeze moving fallen leaves around it. Emma's notebook rests gently on the chair, the photo of her and Lila catching the last warm rays. The world is calm, still, and peaceful, a visual whisper of closure, resilience, and the quiet strength that lingers long after the story ends.